My name is Joe Klein and my wife is Jane. She and I have been living for more than 10 years in a small suburban house where every morning we wake up to the rustling of leaves and the singing of birds. I work as a mason, and although my profession seems simple to many, for me it is a real art. In the hands of any mason, every stone becomes an important part of something larger, be it a house or a bridge, which will serve people for many years to come. Jane works at an insurance company. This is a quiet but responsible job where precision is no less important than in my craft. Jane and I have always been confident that our stability and hard work will help create a strong rear for our family. We have two children, both are under 8 years old, but have already managed to show their characters. The eldest son, Mike, loves to invent all sorts of fictional worlds with monsters and heroes. Time with him is always a new story that stretches for whole days. The youngest, Lily, at first glance seems quiet and obedient, but as soon as you leave her alone, she immediately starts some mischievous tricks. Their curiosity about life forces Jane and me not to stand still, but to constantly be on the move. When we both work, grandparents take care of the children. Our parents, the real pillars of the family, take turns looking after their grandchildren. They are already aged, but each of them finds the strength and time to help us. They lovingly agree on who has more free time on which day and decide who will babysit. Usually this happens in our home, where children are surrounded by familiar things and favorite toys, but sometimes grandparents take the children to their place. These moments are little adventures for Mike and Lily. There is always something special in a grandparent's house: antiques, photographs from the last century, and stories that cannot be heard anywhere else. Children enjoy spending time there, immersing themselves in the special atmosphere of family history. When Jane and I go on a short 3-day vacation to recuperate and take a little time away from each other and from everyday work, the parents happily agree to take care of their grandchildren. They say it's an opportunity to relive the joys of parenthood, but this time without the responsibilities they had when they were younger. Next week, her mother is going to look after the children at her home for a week. She will take care of them not only during the day, but also at night, as if they were little again. All this time Jane will be away from us in another part of the city where she will have to undergo special training. These are not just courses, this is a whole preparation for her new position. Jane must learn to use a new computer program and system to be ready for new challenges at work. She will leave on Sunday and return only next Saturday. This is an important event for us. With this new computer system, if all goes well, Jane will be able to work from home full-time. This will greatly change our way of life, because she will be able to spend more time with the children and at the same time earn money. It will not only be more convenient for our family, but it will also bring us more income, which will allow us to make long-awaited improvements to our home and maybe even save up for a big trip that we have been dreaming about for so long. Many of my friends have had a computer for a long time, but we don't have one yet. She, my wife, works on it all day long, immersed in her own affairs, and does not see the need to have it at home. In her opinion, she already has enough work with him, and she doesn't need additional hours behind the screen. She once told me that if we got a computer at home, I would just waste time browsing dubious sites that children might accidentally see while running past. Her words sounded with undisguised alarm, although I did not think that such a threat was real. Perhaps she simply did not want to add another thing to a house that was already filled with worries and obligations. She uses the computer at work for her email and some other equally important matters. Her fingers fly across the keyboard with such confidence and speed, as if they were created specifically for this device, and the screen in front of her reflects her concentrated face, covered with a slight shadow of stress from business correspondence and reports. Looking at her, it's hard to believe that at home she is so strongly against the computer. As for me, I probably don't really need a computer. My work is completely different. I am used to working with my arms and back, feeling the rough surface of the material under my fingers, operating heavy tools, feeling how the tension of the muscles combines with rhythmic movements. My hands have become accustomed to hammers and shovels, to things I can feel and touch, rather than smooth keys and virtual commands that seem so far removed from real life. I have guys that I work with who can tell me about news and trends that are happening on the internet, although I have never seen what it looks like. All this talk of theirs about viral videos and forums sounds to me like something distant and obscure. Sometimes it seems that this is all some kind of parallel reality where people do not meet each other face to face, but communicate through screens, as if forgetting how important real communication is. Sometimes, listening to their stories about what can be found on the internet, I find myself thinking that I do not understand this delight, especially when the conversation turns to pictures. I don't understand what kind of pleasure you can get from looking at naked bodies on a screen that you can't touch, that have no warmth and reality. It's like a ghost that can be seen but never felt. It always seemed to me that real intimacy is much more valuable than any virtual images. I did use the computer a few times in the library. The women there, always polite and smiling, gave me a crash course in how to search for books in their system. They made it look so easy. A few clicks of the mouse, and the book you needed was already found. The computer seemed neat and even a little mysterious to me. Opportunities opened up for me that I had never even imagined before. You can search for information, check your email, follow news from all over the world. This little piece of the world of technology, in which everything is arranged logically and precisely, changed my perception a little. Despite this, I am still not sure that the computer will ever become a familiar tool for me. On the one hand, I understand that it has a lot to offer, but on the other hand, I feel that it separates people from reality, drawing them into a world that has no smells, touches, and true emotions. And as long as I can rely on my arms and back to do my job, I think I can get by without it. On Sunday morning, we woke up to early sunlight softly filtering through the curtains, filling the room with warmth. We started the day with the usual bustle of getting the kids ready for the trip. They happily packed their small suitcases with their favorite toys and clothes, looking forward to a few days at Grandma's. Her mother's house was in the suburbs, in a quiet area where the air was fresher and the trees taller than in the city center. When we arrived, my grandmother was already waiting for us at the entrance, smiling welcomingly. The children, without hiding their delight, ran to her, hugging her as if they had not seen each other for ages. After we said goodbye to them and made sure they were comfortable, we headed off to the next part of our route. We needed to pick up my wife's friends with whom she planned to fly to a training seminar. First on the list was Carol. We drove up to her house, located on the corner of a picturesque street, where the windows were decorated with flower pots. She ran out to meet us, cheerful and energetic, as always. She's about 32 and the kind of person who instantly lifts your spirits. Carol is the soul of any company. She is great at parties and in ordinary conversations. Her infectious laugh could liven up the most boring meeting. She, as my wife told me, knew how to easily make new acquaintances, and her social circle was full of a variety of people. Carol quickly threw her suitcase into the trunk, sat in the back seat, and began chatting cheerfully, as if we had all known each other for a long time. Bob was next. We pulled up to his house a few blocks from Carol. A tall, fit young man stood at the porch, carrying a neat small suitcase in his hands. Bob is only 29 years old, but his past seems so complex and rich that it's hard to believe how it all fits into his biography. He came to work in my wife's department a year ago, after he made probably one of the biggest decisions of his life to leave the monastery and the church. After school, when most of his peers were considering what profession to study, Bob chose the path of spirituality and humility. He entered a monastery immediately after graduation and spent 4 years there. These years were probably full of prayers, reflections, and inner work on oneself, because life in such a place requires deep dedication and immersion. However, after 4 years of monastic life, he realized that this was not exactly what he wanted. Bob decided to try his hand at church work, coming under the guidance of a senior clergyman, but after another 2 years he realized that this path was not suitable for him. It took a lot of courage for him to admit this to himself and go out into the real world in which he may have felt like an outsider. Now he found himself here among his colleagues, starting from scratch, adapting to life outside the strict confines of monastic law. My wife said that the girls in her department often joked about him, thinking he was cute and a little mysterious. In appearance, he did look attractive, tall about 6 ft 2 in, approximately 188 centimeters, slim, but with a well-proportioned figure weighing about 180 pounds 82 kilograms. His movements were confident, but there was some unusual softness in them, as if the past had left its imprint on his body and soul. He used to wear very thick glasses, which the girls said made his look a little old-fashioned, but at the same time added charm. However, he recently decided to undergo vision correction surgery, and now glasses are a thing of the past. This was probably an important step for Bob, a symbol of his transition from one stage of life to another, more free and open to the world. We loaded his suitcase and Bob got into the car, greeting everyone politely. I caught a note of restraint in his voice. He was clearly a man accustomed to silence and calm, which made him stand out from the bright and cheerful Carol. The car pulled away smoothly, and now we were all heading to the airport, where my wife, Carol, and Bob were about to begin a new little adventure, a training seminar that perhaps would become the next step for them on the path to new experience and knowledge. I just can't understand how Bobby can handle all these girls in the office every day. My wife often talks about the atmosphere at work. As soon as Bob came to their department, the girls immediately paid attention to him. Of course, they couldn't miss the opportunity to make fun of such a young and inexperienced guy. Their team is full of energetic, cheerful girls who always find a way to have fun, be it during lunch or over a cup of coffee in the office. But most of all, my wife says, they are amused by Bobby. He is only 29 and is still a little naive and timid, despite the fact that he has been trying to adapt to his new life for several years. Every time one of the girls throws a party or bachelorette party, Bob always receives an invitation. It has become a kind of tradition. No one wants to be left out. However, as soon as he receives the invitation, his face immediately turns red. My wife laughs when she talks about how he is lost, not knowing what to say. Bob never went to such events, preferring to avoid noisy parties where the atmosphere of casual fun reigned. But sometimes, after work, he still agrees to have a drink with his colleagues for a couple of hours, just to maintain communication. But this happens rarely. Bob prefers not to stay long. Just a few years ago, he was a completely different person. Jane told me that he used to wear bulky, thick glasses, which he said made him look ugly and awkward. These glasses hid his eyes and gave his face a stern, slightly gloomy look. On top of that, his hair was a mess, as if he didn't know what to do with it and just gave up on it. His hair, long and unkempt, did not in any way harmonize with his tall and stately physique. The girls in the office immediately noticed this, deciding that they needed to help the guy clean up. One day, when they got together again after work, they literally dragged him to a beauty salon, which they often visited themselves. This visit turned out to be a real revelation for Bob. He had his hair cut into a neat, stylish shape that finally accentuated his features rather than hiding them under thick locks. Now he looked completely different, well-groomed, confident, and, as the girls said, quite attractive. Until recently, Bob was the kind of guy who could easily be overlooked. But now, in their opinion, he may well find himself a girl. Of course, they never missed an opportunity to joke with him, saying that now he simply has no right to remain a bachelor. When we picked him up on Sunday morning to take him to the airport, I was pleasantly surprised by his changes. To be honest, I didn't even recognize him right away. Bob has changed a lot. Almost nothing remains of that shy guy with old-fashioned glasses. He looked fresh and confident, with new short hair, and without the usual glasses that had been an integral part of him for so long. Apparently, vision correction surgery really changed a lot for him. Now he looked at the world with his own eyes, without an optical barrier, and it seemed that this added courage to him. However, despite these changes, the girls in the office still continued to joke about him. Jane said they called him Bobby, as if to emphasize his youth and inexperience. Bob is always embarrassed by this nickname, but it seems to have stuck to him, and no one calls him anything else. Whenever they want, they can make him blush. All it takes is one joke or an innocent comment. Although he smiles back, he always lowers his eyes slightly, as if he is not used to such attention. When I drove them to the airport, the atmosphere in the car was relaxed. Carol and my wife were actively discussing plans for the upcoming seminar, and Bob sat quietly in the back seat, lost in thought, but smiling from time to time during their conversations. Perhaps he was already used to being in the company of these girls, although his embarrassment still showed that he was not completely accustomed. Upon arrival at the airport, I helped them unload their luggage and wished them luck. Bob thanked me for the trip with his usual politeness, and I watched them leave for the terminal. I decided to stay and wait for their plane to take off. When he finally took off, I felt a slight sense of relief. Their trip had begun, and now I could safely return home. After I saw my wife and her friends off to the airport, I headed to my father's house. He was away for a couple of days on business, and I had to take care of his dog. It was my responsibility for the week to keep an eye on his beloved Labrador, who was a true machine of energy and devotion. As soon as I arrived at the house, the dog was already waiting for me at the gate, excitedly wagging his tail and jumping around, looking forward to a walk. This Labrador was huge, but gentle, with shiny black fur and kind, wide-open eyes. He was always happy to go for a walk, especially when he knew that he would have to run after the balls ahead of him. We went to the nearest park, where I usually walked him. I took a tennis racket and some balls with me. This was his favorite way to play. He loved to chase balls while I hit them with my racket, and he did it with incredible speed and excitement. I watched him scamper across the grass, showing his energy and grace with each serve. The dog was truly happy at these moments, and this was transmitted to me, removing all the fatigue and worries of the past day. When he finally ran out and was tired, we returned home. Returning to my father's house, I filled his bowl with food. Although the dog did not eat until the morning, this cunning dog always insisted that the bowl be full. He just needed to know that there was food, as if it gave him some kind of peace of mind. That's how he was always ready for any meal, even if it hadn't arrived yet. I did everything as usual and, looking at the time, decided that it was time to return home. My father's house was equipped with everything one could wish for a comfortable evening. He had satellite cable with dozens of sports channels, as well as several channels for adults, something he always mentioned with a slight smile on his face. Usually, when I stayed with him, I would turn on a match or even one of those special channels, but today I had other plans. I wanted to get home and finish the room I started redecorating last week. This room has needed attention for a long time, and I decided that today was the day when I could finally finish it all. When I arrived at the house, Ralph and Peter, my old friends, were waiting for me on the porch. They sat holding bottles of beer and with a lazy smile said that they had come to help me paint the room. It was unexpected, but pleasant. These guys are always ready to help, even if you don't call them directly. I parked the car and we all headed inside together. Peter took the beer out of the bag, and I put it in a cooler with ice to keep it cold while I worked. A cooler of beer was an important element of the evening. It added lightness and ease to the whole event, as often happens when you get together with friends. We took the cooler with us into the room and started working. The room wasn't very big, but it still required a lot of effort to paint it correctly. We followed the standard pattern. Ralph took on the corners, Peter helped with the walls, and I made sure everything went according to plan. It's always easier to work with friends. They supported me with jokes and conversations, and beer helped me relax, but not to such an extent that someone began to interfere with work. I was a little worried that the guys might drink too much and start messing things up, but fortunately they only drank a little and the work went smoothly. By 10 o'clock in the evening the room was completely ready. We finished earlier than I expected, and it took a lot of weight off my shoulders. I was glad that the room was finally in order, and now I could forget about the renovation and focus on other things. After the work was completed, the guys stayed for a while, drank another bottle of beer, and after exchanging a few words, went home. I stood in the refreshed room, feeling pleasantly satisfied that everything was finally done. After they left, I decided to make myself a sandwich before going to bed. I headed to the kitchen, already imagining how I would bite off a large piece of fresh bread and ham. But my plans were interrupted by the sudden ringing of the phone. It was Jane, my wife. She was calling from her mobile phone, and her voice sounded cheerful, even a little excited. She said that their flight had been great, and that they had already started having fun as soon as they arrived. Jane laughed as she explained how she and Carol continued to play pranks on Bobby and how much fun they had teasing him. She described how Bob looked cute and funny with his new glasses and stylish haircut, but was still embarrassed by every comment they made. She added that Bob still finds it difficult to find a girlfriend because he is very shy, especially around the opposite sex. Then Jane suddenly said that she had recently learned that Bob often spent time on adult sites, just like my father. I chuckled when I heard this, and Jane immediately remembered our old conversations. "This is why I won't buy you a computer," she reminded me with a playful note in her voice. She then said that she and Carol stayed in the same room and Bob took a separate one. After they unpacked and cleaned up, they decided to go to dinner. But before that, they went to pick Bob up in his room. It turned out that he had left the door open because he was taking a shower, and the girls came in and waited for him to finish. And then, as if by chance, they noticed that a video from an adult site was open on his laptop. This caused a wave of laughter. The girls laughed so loudly that, according to Jane, they almost fell to the floor. During dinner, they continued to tease Bob mercilessly, and he blushed all the time, not knowing what to do. Jane said she laughed so hard she almost peed herself. She then handed the phone to Carol, who repeated the same story, laughing even louder. I could hear in their voices that they both drank more than they had planned and were in very high spirits. Jane admitted that she drank 4 glasses of wine, even though she knew it would go to her head. She said that they were going to go to the cinema or theater during the week if they found something worthy. She then asked when I could answer her call tomorrow. I said maybe I'd stop by for a drink with the guys before heading home. She replied that she would call around 6 or 7 in the evening before the three of them went out to some events again. At the end of the conversation, she asked how things were going with her computer class, which she asked me to look into. I didn't go into details, saying that I was planning everything. In fact, I wanted her to think it was a big project, so I could get a little extra time to relax and do my own things. I was going to stop by for a beer on Monday, but I wanted to finish cleaning Jane's room. I still had to remove the masking tape. Jane called me at 6:30 and said she was having a good day and was doing very well with the program. She didn't think she would have any problems with it. She told me she had fried chicken for dinner. She said they went to Bob's room when he brought them the newspaper to see what, where, and when the show was on. Of course, she said they would pester Bobby, and I laughed about it with her. I hung up the phone after talking to Jane and realized that I still had things to do for the evening. My father entrusted me with taking care of his dog, and although I had already completed the main part, the dog required more attention. My father's dog is a real giant Labrador, black as coal, with clear eyes, full of devotion and a desire to play. He had a special doggy door in the back of the house through which he could go out into the fenced backyard any time he wanted. There he spent most of the day, running on the lawn or simply lying in the sun. But despite this, he still needed to be walked. Labradors cannot sit still. I took him to the park, where we spent about an hour each time. The Labrador ran happily around the field, outrunning the wind, chasing balls that I threw to him with a special racket. He never got bored. Every time he jumped for the ball with the same enthusiasm, as if it was the first time all day. The park gradually began to empty at 8 in the evening. It was closed to visitors, so 20 minutes later we returned home. The dog had already begun to run out of steam, but his eyes still sparkled with enthusiasm and a desire to play more. He always returned from walks with a feeling of victory, as if he had been able to beat himself in a race for the ball. Returning to the house, I decided to take a short break. I sat down on the couch, turned on a sports game on TV, and opened a beer. The Labrador, feeling that the evening was coming to an end, settled down next to me, curled up on the rug by the sofa, but still watched me with one eye. Dogs seem to be able to sense your mood and calmness, and I felt his complete satisfaction with the day. When I opened the second bottle of beer, the cap slipped off my fingers and fell behind the sofa cushion. Cursing under my breath, I reached out for it, but when I pulled the pillow, I suddenly came across something unexpected: my father's old journal, which was clearly not intended for public viewing. It was one of those adult magazines he always seemed to have hidden around the house. I picked it up and thought for a second. My father never hid his hobbies, and I knew about it from my youth. He always jokes about sex, especially after he retired and started enjoying life, he said. I remembered how my mother once mentioned this with a slight smile. I'm happy for him, as long as he doesn't follow me too much. This was a kind of balance in their relationship. Mom accepted his little pranks with humor and without unnecessary questions. I chuckled, put the magazine back under the pillow, and decided to focus on the game while continuing to drink my beer. The evening was calm, nothing foreshadowed any strange events. However, after a few minutes, the dog suddenly jumped up and, raising its head, began to bark loudly. She headed towards the back door, clearly wary of something outside. I quickly went to the door and looked out, but didn't notice anything. Perhaps it was just a neighbor's cat or some small animal that slipped by. The dog calmed down, but still continued to growl, clearly unhappy that he had to be distracted from his rest. I stood there a little longer, waiting for him to come back inside. After everything calmed down, I decided to look into my father's computer. I knew he had a lot of adult stuff, and I was curious what he kept in there. Opening the browser, I was a little surprised by the number of open tabs and bookmarks of sites that he visited. It was a veritable treasure trove of adult content, and I couldn't help but chuckle, imagining him sitting there, alone, looking through all this material. I started opening a few websites just out of curiosity to see what they were about. Most of them were just regular videos and galleries, but one site caught my attention. It was a webcam platform where people could chat live. There were girls, guys, couples, and even a lot of gay guys, as I noticed. I found myself in the lobby where people were discussing all sorts of explicit topics. They asked the girls to show their breasts and behaved quite freely. Among the conversations, I saw a familiar nickname, Bobby. This name was too similar, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the same Bobby, my wife's boyfriend, with whom she was now at the seminar. I was overwhelmed by a wave of doubts and suspicions. I decided to go into his room to check. The same standard conversation took place there. People talked to the girls, egging them on to show more. I sat looking at the screen, and my suspicions only grew stronger. It was the same Bobby, the guy Jane had talked about in our conversations. They all called him Bobby, and I started to think maybe it's really him. What if he somehow ended up in this room by accident, or if it was set up by Jane and Carol as part of their parties? It all seemed strange and absurd, but I couldn't get rid of the thought that it was the same guy. I sat in front of the screen for about 45 minutes, watching what was happening. The girls in the room behaved quite relaxed, but their faces were not shown. This only increased my doubts. I tried to look at their features to catch something familiar, but they were too cautious. However, despite all my guesses, I was almost 99% sure that it was Jane and Carol who were playing a prank on Bobby in this way, or playing their own game. This was the moment when I felt that I had stumbled upon something more than just an accident. All I could do was wait for Jane to tell me what happened. I understood that if they really participated in this, she would definitely say something, without even suspecting that I had already seen everything. On Tuesday at work, I talked to a few guys who helped me better understand how webcam sites and chat rooms work. They explained how to behave in such chats, what to avoid, and what topics are best to raise. After work, I went to a bar where I met a few other guys who frequent there, and they gave me even more advice. One of them mentioned that it is best to say that you are from another country, as this helps maintain anonymity, and women on sites are afraid that they might be recognized. He also said that there is no need to rush things. It is better to act gradually, and then you can achieve more. It was, of course, strange advice, but I listened, trying to understand how such things work. They asked which site I was looking at, and I said another one. They listed a lot of sites, but none of them were the ones I saw Jane and her friends on. This reassured me a little. The chances of them being seen were very small. Also, most of the people on those sites I was told were from the UK, and very few were from the US. One of the guys explained that many of the members of such sites are over 50 or gay, and there are many men for every woman, which makes communication in this way even more difficult. On Tuesday evening, when Jane called, she said that she and Carol did not go to the cinema, but simply walked around the city, drank coffee, and had a small snack. She also said that they were going to have dinner at the hotel tonight and then have a couple of drinks at the bar. Jane noted that the classes were going well and that she was learning the material quickly. She said they planned to go to bed early. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't interrupt her. When she hung up at 6 o'clock, I went back to my dad's to walk his Labrador. After walking the dog, I returned home around 8:30 and opened my dad's computer. Going to the same site, I saw them again. Jane and her friend were again on camera, but their faces were still not shown. On the bed, they had a box of pizza, beer, and wine. It looked like it was a real party. They looked relaxed and having fun. Bobby was there too, sitting in the center, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and the girls on the sides were wearing crop tops and shorts. It was clear that they were just fooling around and enjoying communication. The chat was quite active, but there were not many people in the room, about 20. Slowly, new users started joining, and I noticed that when the group realized that most of the members were from Europe, they became a little more open and even showed their faces. This attracted more attention, and the room filled with new spectators. By 10 o'clock in the evening, I noticed that there were already about 50 people in the room, although at first there were fewer. The girls continued to chat, drinking wine cocktails, and the atmosphere became more and more relaxed. In the chat, many tried to egg them on to something more, but they didn't do anything too explicit. They just played and joked. It was more like harmless fun, although I understood that the situation could go beyond the limits. When I watched all this, I was not overcome with anger. I didn't see this as a serious threat. On the contrary, it looked like an ordinary fun game, albeit with an element of risk. Of course, I understood that if someone had been left alone with Bobby, the situation might have developed differently. But overall, I didn't feel it threatened my relationship with Jane. If this was some random moment, I would not make a tragedy out of it. Although the thought of an ongoing affair would worry me, I did not think that such an isolated situation would become a reason for something serious, especially divorce. On Wednesday, I only worked half a day. It started to rain, and I spent the rest of the day at home thinking about it all. I myself had 3 such cases throughout our marriage. One time, Jane went to another city while we were having a party. I told her I wasn't going, but she insisted I go because her best friend Alice was coming and her ex-husband might be there too. He had already beaten her once, so Jane wanted me to keep an eye on her and, if necessary, beat him. I used to be a boxer and would fight at the slightest provocation. But after the birth of my second child, I calmed down and no longer dealt with such nonsense. Well, it looks like I looked after her too well. I stayed with her overnight and slept with her. This happened before we had children. The second incident occurred when Jane went with our first child to visit relatives. The third time was when she took both children to visit her relatives again. I wasn't looking for anything like that on purpose. It just happened. Everything came together naturally. Too much beer, too much flirting, and now 2 people are already having sex. Everything worked out perfectly, so to speak. No, I never told Jane about my infidelity. I don't need such problems. When I looked at the screen again, the girls had gathered in a meeting again. This didn't bode well for Bobby. I wondered what they would come up with now. They eventually sat back down, sipping their wine cocktails. On Thursday, I stopped in for a few drinks and then stopped in for some food. I stopped at my house to see if Jane had called me. She left a message that Carol was visiting her aunt and uncle for dinner and would be spending the evening with them to catch up. They'll come pick her up. Jane said that she and Bob were going to have dinner together, and then she would either sit with him at the bar or go to his room and then go to bed early. I arrived at my father's house around 7, and took the dog to the park again. When I returned, I turned on the computer and went to the same site. There were only the two of them on the screen, Jane and Bob. They lay on the bed and looked at the camera or laptop, barely finishing Chinese food from boxes. Next to Bob's beer was a glass of wine for Jane. Jane was wearing shorts and a small top that showed her midriff. Bob was wearing trousers and a sports shirt. They had just put away the food, which meant they had finished dinner. When they returned, they both sat cross-legged. Chat users started wondering where the third girl was, and they said that she had left, but would be back at the same time tomorrow. In the chat they wrote, "Now that the other girl has left, you two can have sex." Jane and Bob laughed at these comments. Jane kept leaning on Boy's shoulder. She moved sometimes, but most of the time she sat pressed against his shoulder. The chat users were still real pigs. They asked them to have sex. They offered everything you could imagine. They tried to guess her age, calling numbers from 21 to 25 years. In fact, she was 33 and had 2 children. They had sex. Afterwards, they both cleaned themselves up while they drank again. They talked a little more and swore to secrecy that they would not tell anyone about what was happening here. He said it was his first time. He'll never tell because he's never had it so good. On Friday, I went to the store for groceries and, of course, for beer. I also needed to get home and clean the house and get all the dishes ready that I had prepared for the week. Then there was everything that needed to be washed. Nothing like a single life. Well, when I walked in, the phone was blinking. It was a call from Jane at 9:32 am. "Dear, we will arrive at the airport on Friday at 6:47. Please pick us up. The damn company got the seminar schedule wrong, and today it ends at noon, a day early. We leave at 4:12. Try to be there. If you can't come, we'll go home by taxi. Bye, baby. I love you." Wow, that must have pissed Jane off when they changed their schedule. She and Bobby had big plans for tonight, but that was no longer the case. I wanted to see how she could get Carol to ask her out for the night. Oh well, I rushed off to do the housework. I hadn't even eaten and decided we could go out to eat tonight. I picked them up at the airport and took Bobby home and then dropped Carol off. I told Jane I hadn't eaten and neither had she, so we went out to eat. Jane seemed to sink 1 minute and rise the next. I think she was thinking about Bobby and was confused. Over dinner, I told her about everything I was doing at home and about Daddy's dog at the park. She told me about her studies and how well she was doing. She would be happy to work from home, but she would miss working with all her friends. Then I told her something else about my work. She didn't seem to listen to me because her mind was still worn out. She wasn't with me at all. Then I asked her how Bobby was coping, and she lit up like a Christmas tree. She went on and on telling me about all the stupid things he had done. She then explained how she and Carol had molested him. I heard her slide a couple of times as if she was saying chat and camera, but I acted like it just went over my head. I didn't ask her anything. Now she was the old Jane I loved. We went home, showered, and then had a great night of sex. That was great. On Saturday, we went to bed late. After breakfast, I went to do some yard work while Jane went shopping. She said she would be back in a couple of hours because she needed to buy groceries for the whole week. She left at noon, calling the children and saying that we would pick them up on Sunday. Well, she came home at 2:30 with a carload of food. We put all that aside and took a small sandwich with us for dinner. Jane brought us a steak, which we grilled for dinner. I helped her around the house and then started grilling. She took the food to the picnic table and we sat and ate while we talked. She told me more about this workshop and how she was going to set up her office in her old bedroom. She calculated how much we would save if she worked from home, and it was a lot of money. Jane said the company would connect us to a high-speed network for the computer. She then told me that since we were saving money, it was time to get a computer. If her company got free internet, we would save money there and could just get on the line for free. She said all we had to do was keep me off adult sites while kids were around. I'll have to go online after 8:30 when the kids are already asleep. The internet also has a lot of sports sites and all sorts of things that we can enjoy as a family. Then there was a pause in the conversation, and I intervened. Wow, Bob Ellis sure looked good. Nothing like the last time I saw him. Now he looks almost human. What do you mean almost? He's great because he doesn't wear glasses, and we did his hair. He also told us that he started going to the gym to work out. Now I just need to teach him how to act in front of a girl. What do you mean, you? Well, I meant us girls. We took him under our wing like mother hens. He is more or less a project for us girls. This is one of the things I will miss about work. 2 weeks ago, Mary and Carol took him shopping and made him buy all the new clothes. Well, the other girls will have to replace you, but you still have 2 weeks to complete the mission. Yes, it upsets me. I have loved going to work since he started working for us. Well, I'll just have to make the most of the time I have left. If I need more time, I'll just have to go out at night to help him. She came up to me, hugged me tightly, and kissed me. The next week was normal for us, nothing new. She told me what stupid things Bobby tried to do. They took Bobby to buy new shoes and had to pick them out for him. She told me that those three were going to a party 2 hours before the end of the workday. She told me that Carol and Bobby wanted to go out with us husbands on Friday night for dinner and dancing. Well, we all went out on a night of celebration. We got our table, and I met Carol's husband Chuck at the bar. He said, "I thought Bobby must be a jerk the way my wife talks. Damn, I better keep an eye on this guy. My wife talks about him all the time." Yes, Jane talks about him all the time. We returned to the table and ate. The food was good, and the conversation was excellent. Afterwards, we went to Artie's to dance. Chuck and I had already talked and said we'd let the girls dance whatever they wanted with Bobby. Let them warm up, and we will benefit from it at night. Jane said, Bobby wasn't a good dancer, so they suggested they end the party, and the girls went to his house to teach him how to dance. Both girls laughed so hard they almost peed their pants. Carol then said, or we could go back to our house and teach him to dance whatever you guys want. We'll leave it up to you guys. We decided on our house, since the children were again with their grandparents, and I had a large and spacious room. We bought more drinks on the way home and got home at 9:30. The following week, Jane was working from home and told me she would have to slow down. She talked to Carol and Bobby and found out how much they got done in a day, and she got a lot more done. She said she wanted to maintain relationships with all of them. She liked working from home. They had to use the computer for 6 hours and paper and documents for 2 hours. On Tuesday, she asked if she could go out for drinks on Saturday night to relax a little, and I told her, sure, just don't drink and drive, and she agreed. She said she would take a taxi. On Saturday, she took a bath and got dressed to go out. I stayed downstairs, but the children were with her. I heard them talking to her. At about 7-something, she came down the stairs with the children, and at 7:30, we left in a taxi. At 8, I put the kids to bed and went to the garage where I picked up the Mac laptop I'd borrowed early that morning while Jane was shopping. I needed it because we didn't have it yet. I connected it and went to the site. They weren't online. To be online, they had to go to his house. Was she even with him? She could have been out with the girls, but the way she acted told me she was going to meet him. If she was dating girls, she would mention the girls' names or where they were going. In any case, I didn't expect them so early. I figured she had fun on camera and would do it again. I searched and found a few girls and watched them with a beer. I knew my father's name and password, so I used that. Plus, in this way, Dad could not register on the site, since I had already authorized him, and it did not allow him to register. He might think that the site is down and go to another site where he can log in. A little after 9, Bobby checked in, and his bed was shown there. There was no one there, but I could hear conversation in the background. It was a guy and a girl, but I couldn't hear the voice well enough to tell who it was. Then 10 minutes later, I saw them accept the bag on the bed and opened it. They had food and drinks. Then I hear him say, I wanted to invite you to dinner. If we went out to dinner, I would be too full to have sex. You eat your sandwich, I'll eat my salad, and then we can fool around. I don't have much time. Well, they were sitting on the bed, talking, eating, and chatting with people. They had sex. Bobby said he loved her, but she told him it was just sex. And that's all. Half an hour later, she returned home. I was lying in bed and acting as if I was sleeping. She had just gotten into bed after another shower and immediately fell asleep. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday were normal days. She said work was going well, and she enjoyed working from home for the company. She hoped it would last a long time. I saw that she was upset about something. On Wednesday, when I came home from work, Jane looked tense. She quietly said that she wanted to talk to me later after the kids went to bed. I felt that something was wrong, but decided not to ask questions right now. Nodding my head, I went to the kitchen to get a beer, just as the kids ran up to me to show me their schoolwork. They proudly held notebooks with high grades in their hands, and I smiled, praising them for their diligence. It was always important for the children to hear words of encouragement from me, and I knew that such moments should be treasured. When they went to their rooms and I was alone again, silence fell over the house, and all my thoughts began to revolve around what Jane had to say. I settled down on the sofa in the living room and turned on the TV, trying to distract myself from thoughts about the upcoming conversation. But it turned out to be more difficult than I expected. Hundreds of questions were born in my head. Was she going to tell me about Bobby? Did she know that I had already guessed everything? Did she want to change something or continue what had already begun? Or maybe she was ready to leave me for him. Thoughts crashed into each other, creating only more uncertainty. I seemed to know more about Bobby than she might have guessed, but what if her version of events was completely different? One thing remained constant: I did not have a single answer to my questions. After dinner, as I helped Jane wash the dishes, I noticed that she was nervous. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her eyes seemed wet, as if she was about to cry. I offered to make coffee, and she agreed, although it was clear that her thoughts were somewhere far away. We didn't talk about the upcoming conversation, but this silence only increased the tension. When the children finally went to bed, we met in the office. Jane sat on one chair, and I sat on the other. There was more than just a few meters of space between us. It was as if we were on different banks of the same river, and someone had to build a bridge. I felt silence hanging in the air, broken only by the quiet ticking of the clock. Finally, she began to speak. "Joe, I have a little problem," she began quietly, avoiding direct gaze. "This is all my stupidity, and I need you to help me get out of the situation in which I find myself." I didn't interrupt, waiting for him to continue. "It has to do with Bobby. I was too friendly with him." Her voice trembled. "Too friendly. We've crossed the line. Now he thinks I'm in love with him, and I don't love you anymore. Although this is not true. We were just fooling around too much. Now he wants me to come to his house whenever possible, but Joe, I don't want that anymore. I don't want anything to do with him." She paused, as if every word was difficult for her. "It's my fault," she continued, barely holding back tears, "not his. I'm older and should probably be smarter. I let the situation go too far. You know how convincing I can be when I want to. I can explain everything in detail if you want. It's a long story, but I'm ready to tell you everything." Her words cut me, but I understood that what was important now was not what had already happened, but what would happen next. I wanted to protect her, even through the pain. "No need," I said, feeling the tension building inside me. "You've already said enough. So you want me to call him and explain what real life is like, or do you want me to meet him in person and explain to him? I understand that you don't want me to use force, but I will protect you if necessary. You know that." Jane nodded, trying to find the words. "Yes, I know you will protect me, but I don't want to see him get hurt. I don't think a simple call will solve the problem, but maybe it's better than anything more. Can I tell you what to tell him?" "No, I'll figure it out myself," I answered. My determination was strong. I understood that this conversation should be brief but clear. "Of course. Can I listen in on the conversation?" she asked with uncertainty. "Of course, I agreed, taking her phone. She took it out of her pocket and handed it to me. Do you even talk to him about work? I asked, thinking about how to start the conversation. No, we hardly communicate at work. It's more personal. I dialed the number and Bobby answered almost immediately. I knew that as soon as he saw her number, he would pick up the phone immediately. His voice was quiet and perhaps even joyful. Hello, he said. Bobby, this is Mr. Clean. Can you talk for a few minutes? I began firmly. Oh, hi, Joe. Yes, of course, I can talk. Okay, Bobby. Glad you're in touch. Look, to you, I'm Mr. Clean, not Joe. Do you understand me? Yes, he answered, visibly tense. Great. Now listen carefully. I will talk, and you will listen. When I'm finished, you can have your say. Are we still on the same page? Yes. Well done, Bobby, I continued with cool calm. This evening, when I returned home, I found my wife, Jane, upset. I don't like it when she's upset. I love my wife, and she loves me. When she has a problem, I solve it. And I solve this problem so that it does not happen again. It can be painful sometimes, but I do what I need to do. I paused, feeling Bobby listening, perhaps in mild horror. Jane told me that she wants to stop communicating with you. You don't call her anymore. Don't write. No contact at all. This applies to everything. Got it, Bobby? I understand that she doesn't want to communicate with me, but I don't understand why, he answered quietly. Bobby, that's life. So, I will repeat. You will no longer communicate with Jane. It's over. I hope you understand, because if I have to come and meet you in person, neither you nor I will like it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, I understand. His voice trembled. But we had good times together. Would you like me to tell you about them? No, Bobby, I interrupted him sharply. I don't need to know about anything that happened between you. It's over. Do you understand this? And if I have to come to you, I guarantee it will be bad for you, not for me. That's it. The conversation is over. Bye, Bobby answered quietly, and I hung up. Joe felt strangely relieved when he hung up. Anger was still seething inside him, but there was also another emotion, fatigue. Tired of this whole situation, of the thought that perhaps his marriage was hanging by a thread. He wanted to forget everything, just return to the quiet life that he and Jane had built for so many years. However, he knew that it was not that simple. Jane, standing nearby, seemed to be waiting for his reaction. She nervously straightened her hair, her gaze full of anxiety. She was afraid that talking to Bobby would be the beginning of the end for their relationship. She realized that she had gone too far, but did not know how to correct this mistake. Joe, taking a deep breath, rose from his chair and looked at his wife. He didn't know what to say. All the words seemed out of place. He came closer to her and, contrary to his thoughts, hugged her. It was not a passionate gesture, but rather an act of support, as if he wanted to say, "We will get through this." I don't want to know the details, Jane. It is important to me that this does not happen again. We need to restore what we have lost, he said quietly, feeling her body relax in his arms. I promise, she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. This will never happen again. They stood like that for a long time, just hugging each other, without saying a word. Both understood that it would not be easy further. It's hard to build trust after something like that, but they were willing to try. Joe couldn't get out of his head those moments when he saw Jane with Bobby on camera, her laughter, flirtatious glances. However, he knew that if they both wanted to save their family, they would have to work on themselves. The next morning, everything seemed strangely normal. Jane was preparing breakfast for the children who had returned from Grandma's, and Joe was finishing up the housework. They tried to act as if nothing had happened, but behind these habitual actions, there were many unexpressed emotions. During dinner, the children enthusiastically talked about their adventures with their grandparents. Mike again made up a story about mythical creatures, and Lily, laughing, told how their grandfather taught her to bake pies. Their lightheartedness momentarily distracted Joe and Jane from their own thoughts, and they smiled, although somewhere deep in their souls each of them continued to process what had happened. A week has passed. Jane began working from home as planned, but the atmosphere in the house remained tense. At times, Joe found himself wanting to ask her how her evenings were going, but each time he retreated, afraid to hear the truth. They talked, but it was clear that this conversation was only part of a process that was supposed to lead them to something more to healing. On Friday evening, Jane suggested, "Maybe we can go out somewhere today. I think we should spend the evening together, just relax and be together." Joe nodded, understanding that this was her way of getting their relationship back on track. They chose a quiet restaurant near their home so as not to attract attention. Over dinner, they talked a little about children, about plans for the future, and even about a possible trip that they had long wanted to organize. But there was still an invisible barrier between them that had yet to be destroyed. When they returned home, Joe finally decided to talk about what was bothering him. "Jane, do you really want to save our relationship?" he asked quietly as they sat on the sofa. She looked at him, weariness, but also determination, visible in her eyes. "Yes, Joe, I want to. I made a mistake, a big mistake, but I want to make it right. I understand that this will take time, and I am ready to work on it. I love you." "I love you too," Joe said, "but we need trust. Without him, we will not be able to move forward." They sat in silence, both knowing that the road to recovery would be long, but if they could overcome this crisis, their relationship would become stronger. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.